with by looking at her. You can't tell by her confidence, her smile, or how well she carries herself, but you can tell by how she talks. Most men think the truth will come in numbers. It doesn't. It comes in phrases, casual lines that sound harmless in the moment, but quietly expose how she relates to sex, attachment, and commitment. And here's the danger. If you don't understand those phrases, you'll normalize behavior that doesn't align with the kind of relationship you actually want. In this video, I'm going to break down 8 things women say that often reveal a high body count. Once you recognize them, you won't need to ask for proof. You'll hear it for yourself. Now, let me make something clear. This isn't about shaming women, and it's not about policing anyone's past. I'm not here to attack women. I'm here to decode patterns so you can protect your standards without guilt. If you're a man who would rather face uncomfortable truth than comfortable lies, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. Let's start with the first thing she says. Number 1, body count is just a number. Picture this. You bring it up calmly, not accusing, not interrogating, just curious. You're trying to understand who she is, where she's been, what shaped her. She tilts her head, smiles softly, and says, "Body count is just a number." It sounds progressive. It sounds mature. It even sounds rational. But listen carefully. When someone tries to shrink the importance of something before you even react, that's not confidence. That's preemptive defense. Men don't usually obsess over numbers. What they care about is meaning, exclusivity, intent, pattern. So when she rushes to minimize the topic, she's not answering your question. She's reframing it so you feel guilty for even asking. This is what psychologists call cognitive minimization. You reduce the perceived weight of a behavior to avoid responsibility for its implications. If it's just a number, then your discomfort becomes the problem, not her history. And here's where most men fold. They don't want to look insecure. They don't want to look judgmental. So, they laugh it off. They nod. They swallow the instinct that told them something didn't sit right. But understand this, standards are not insecurity. If she truly believed her past aligned with the kind of relationship she wants now, she wouldn't need to downplay it. She would own it calmly, directly, without trying to disqualify your concern. When a woman says, "It's just a number," what she's often really saying is, "Please don't evaluate me by this, and maybe you won't. That's your choice." But if you accept the frame that your standards are shallow or outdated, you are teaching her something powerful, that your boundaries can be negotiated through shame. You don't need a spreadsheet. You don't need a confession. You need to observe her attitude toward her own past, because numbers don't scare men. Avoidance does. Number 2, if men can do it, women can do it too. This one usually shows up with a little edge in her voice. You mention double standards. Or maybe you simply express that sexual history matters differently to you depending on context. And she responds with that line, clean, sharp, rehearsed. If men can do it, women can do it too. On the surface, it sounds like fairness, equality, modern logic. But here's what's really happening. She's shifting the conversation from consequences to rights. Yes, men and women both have the right to make choices. That's not the debate. The real question is, do those choices affect attraction and bonding the same way? Equality of freedom does not guarantee equality of outcome. Men and women are wired differently when it comes to sexual strategy. Many men can separate sex from emotional attachment more easily. For most women, sex biologically intertwines with bonding mechanisms. The more frequently intimacy is detached from commitment, the more that system adapts. When she uses this argument, she's not addressing compatibility. She's demanding immunity from evaluation. And here's the subtle move. If you disagree, you risk being labeled insecure, outdated, or threatened by strong women. So, the pressure shifts onto you. But mature men don't argue morality in circles. They observe patterns. Ask yourself, is she taking responsibility for her choices? Or is she hiding behind ideology to avoid discussing how those choices shaped her? A woman who stands confidently in her decisions doesn't need to weaponize equality. She can explain her perspective without attacking yours. When she says, "If men can do it, women can too," what she's often really saying is, "Don't apply your standards to me." and you have every right to decide whether you will. Don't debate. Don't defend. Just watch how she handles accountability. That tells you more than the slogan ever will. Number 3. I just like my freedom. This one doesn't usually sound defensive. It sounds confident, independent, self-assured. You're talking about exclusivity. Maybe you've been seeing each other for a few weeks. Maybe things are getting deeper. And when you bring up defining the relationship, she leans back and says almost casually, I just really value my freedom. Now pause. Freedom from what? Because in healthy dynamics, commitment isn't imprisonment. It's alignment. It's two people choosing each other voluntarily. But when freedom is emphasized at the exact moment structure is introduced, it often means something else. Non-exclusivity without losing benefits. She wants your attention, your consistency, your emotional investment. But she doesn't want constraint. This is where many men confuse independence with detachment. True independence means I choose you because I want to, not because I need to. Avoidant attachment sounds like I don't want to be accountable to anyone. There's a difference. When a woman has a long history of keeping options open, commitment feels like loss of leverage. So, she reframes it not as fear, not as hesitation, but as empowerment. And here's the quiet danger. If you accept this arrangement, you become the stable base while she preserves optionality. You're not her partner, you're her placeholder. Watch the pattern. Does she want exclusivity from you while resisting it for herself? Does she enjoy the security you provide, but resist offering the same in return? Freedom isn't the problem. Ambiguity is. If she genuinely wants freedom, respect it. Don't fight it. Don't negotiate it. But don't offer full access to someone who refuses full commitment, because the man who fears losing her will accept blurred lines. The man who values himself will require clarity. Number 4. Sex doesn't really mean anything to me. This one is delivered with a certain calm, almost pride. You're talking about intimacy, about connection, about what sex means in a relationship. And she shrugs slightly and says, honestly, sex doesn't really mean anything to me. Some men hear that and think, she's experienced, she's not clingy, she's emotionally stable. But slow down. There is a difference between emotional security and emotional numbness. Biologically, intimacy isn't neutral for most women. Sexual bonding activates attachment chemistry. Repeated cycles of intimacy, followed by detachment, can gradually desensitize that response. The brain adapts. It protects itself. It learns not to attach too deeply. That adaptation can look like confidence, but often it's conditioning. When sex becomes recreational instead of relational over a long period of time, the emotional weight attached to it decreases, not because she evolved beyond attachment, but because her nervous system stopped investing in it. And here's what many men misunderstand. You don't magically become the exception. If she trained herself to detach from intimacy repeatedly, that wiring doesn't reset just because you're different. A woman who says sex means nothing to her isn't signaling strength. She's signaling disconnection. True maturity sounds different. It says sex is meaningful to me, but I'm selective. It doesn't say it's just physical. Because when intimacy becomes just physical, connection becomes optional. And when connection is optional, loyalty becomes conditional. Listen carefully to the emotional tone behind her words. Is she grounded or is she detached? There's a quiet sadness behind people who treat intimacy like a handshake. They had to teach themselves not to feel. And here's the truth most men don't want to face. If you're looking for depth, passion, and emotional bonding, the biggest red flag isn't promiscuity itself. It's indifference. When intimacy no longer carries weight, relationships start to feel transactional, and transactional love never feels safe. Number 5, I don't regret anything. I learned from every experience. This one sounds mature, self-aware, reflective, evolved. You're talking about past relationships, maybe about casual flings, maybe about decisions that clearly weren't aligned with long-term stability. And she says it with conviction. I don't regret anything. I learned from every experience. Now listen closely. Growth is real. People do evolve. But real growth usually carries a trace of humility, sometimes even a little discomfort. When someone claims zero regret, none, it's worth examining what's underneath. There's a psychological mechanism called self-justification bias. We reinterpret our past choices in a way that protects our identity. It's uncomfortable to admit, I made decisions out of loneliness or boredom or validation or revenge. So instead, the narrative becomes empowerment. Every X becomes a lesson. Every hookup becomes a chapter. Every impulsive phase becomes part of the journey. And on paper, that sounds healthy. But here's the difference between reflection and rebranding. Reflection changes behavior. Rebranding changes the story. If she truly learned, you'll see evidence, clear boundaries, different patterns, discernment, not just polished language. Men often confuse articulate explanations with emotional accountability. Ask yourself, does she acknowledge mistakes, or does she present a perfectly curated narrative where every decision was necessary for her evolution? Regret is not weakness. Regret signals that a person's internal standards grew stronger than their past impulses. It shows tension between who they were and who they are becoming. When someone feels no regret at all, it can mean one of two things. Either they genuinely aligned with every choice, or they're protecting themselves from facing it honestly. You're not looking for shame. You're looking for responsibility. Because a woman who takes responsibility for her past is far more stable than one who simply reframes it. And the difference between those two will shape your future with her. Number 6. Everyone has a past. This one usually appears when you start asking better questions, not accusatory questions, just clarifying ones. You lean in a little deeper. You ask about timelines, patterns, context. And instead of specifics, she gives you a blanket statement. Everyone has a past. Technically true, but psychologically strategic. When someone universalizes a behavior, they're trying to neutralize it. If everyone does it, then no one can be evaluated for it. The uniqueness of the pattern disappears. The weight of it softens. This is reputation management disguised as wisdom. Because here's the subtle shift. The conversation moves from her choices to human nature as a whole. And once it becomes abstract, it becomes harder to challenge without sounding unreasonable. But not all pasts are equal. Some people have histories of long-term commitment and a few meaningful relationships. Others have cycles of short-term intensity, detachment, and repetition. Both qualify as a past. They are not the same. When she says this, pay attention to her tone. Is she open to discussing specifics, or is she trying to close the conversation down? Often this phrase is a test. She's measuring how much you're willing to overlook, how quickly you'll retreat, whether your standards are flexible under social pressure. And many men retreat. They don't want to seem judgmental, so they nod. They drop it. They convince themselves that digging deeper would be unfair. But clarity is not cruelty. If the past truly doesn't matter, it wouldn't need a shield. You don't need to interrogate. You don't need to accuse. Just observe whether she can handle direct conversation without hiding behind generalizations, because the man who ignores patterns out of politeness will eventually feel the consequences of those patterns. And by then, it's no longer theoretical. Number 7, it was just a phase. This one usually comes with a soft laugh. You're discussing her past lifestyle, the partying, the constant dating, the situationships, and she waves it off lightly. That was just a phase. I'm not like that anymore. It sounds harmless, temporary, like a season she simply outgrew. But here's what you need to understand. A phase suggests randomness, an isolated chapter, something disconnected from identity. Patterns are different. Patterns are repeated behaviors reinforced over time. And patterns don't disappear because someone declares a new error. They change when internal values change. And that takes more than time. It takes reflection, discipline, and discomfort. Many people don't leave a lifestyle because they evolved. They leave because the options changed. When attention decreases, when competition increases, when the thrill fades, suddenly stability looks appealing. And I want you to hear this carefully. Wanting stability is not wrong. Wanting commitment after chaos is not evil. But you need to distinguish between transformation and transition. Transformation rewires behavior. transition, adjusts, strategy. If her phase lasted years, if it defined her dating pattern, if it shaped how she views men and relationships, that's not a random season. That's conditioning. And conditioning resurfaces under stress. So don't evaluate her based on the story she tells about the past. Evaluate her based on the consistency she demonstrates now. Does she move differently? Does she choose differently? Does she speak about relationships with depth instead of nostalgia? Or does the phase still live in her tone? You're not judging who she was. You're deciding whether who she was still influences who she is, because the man who mistakes a rebrand for a rebirth will always be surprised later. Number 8. I don't get attached easily. This one is almost always delivered with confidence. You're talking about emotions, about how quickly people fall, about vulnerability, and she says it calmly, maybe even proudly. I don't get attached easily. Some men hear that and feel relief. Good. She won't be dramatic. She won't be clingy. She won't create chaos. But look deeper. There's a difference between secure attachment and suppressed attachment. Secure attachment says, I can bond deeply, but I choose carefully. Suppressed attachment says, I learned not to bond deeply because it hurt too many times. When someone repeatedly forms short-term connections, without long-term emotional safety, the attachment system adapts. It becomes guarded, detached, self-protective. Over time, that self-protection can harden into identity. I just don't get attached. That's not always strength. Sometimes it's scar tissue. And here's what you need to understand. Bonding is not weakness. Emotional depth is not desperation. The ability to attach is what creates loyalty, intimacy, and long-term stability. If a woman openly tells you she doesn't attach easily, she is also telling you that emotional intensity is not natural for her anymore. And while that may feel convenient in the beginning, no pressure, no demands, it also means you may never access the depth you're hoping for. A person who struggles to attach doesn't just avoid pain, they avoid surrender. And love requires surrender. If you want something casual, detached, low investment, this won't bother you. But if you want a woman who bonds, who feels deeply, who connects in a way that builds something lasting, don't romanticize emotional distance. Because someone who cannot attach easily will not suddenly attach differently just because you showed up. Pay attention when she says it. She's not warning you about drama, she's warning you about capacity. When you step back and look at all 8 of these phrases together, you start to see something important. None of them are confessions. They're indicators. They're not proof of anything by themselves. They are patterns. And patterns reveal mindset. You don't need to interrogate a woman. You don't need to demand numbers. You don't need to turn into a detective. You just need to listen. Listen to how she frames her past. Listen to whether she minimizes it, justifies it, universalizes it, or shrugs it off. Listen to whether there's accountability or avoidance. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Men don't usually get hurt because women lied brilliantly. They get hurt because they ignored what was clearly said. You cannot control her history. You cannot rewrite her experiences. But you absolutely control the standards you bring into your life. And standards are not insecurity. They are self-respect. A woman who respects herself will not be offended by a man who has standards. She may disagree. She may walk away. But she will not shame you for having them. The man who abandons his standards to avoid tension will eventually feel resentment. The man who stands calmly in his values may lose some women, but he will never lose himself. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these phrases have you heard the most? Which one made you pause? Leave it in the comments. If this video sharpened your awareness, subscribe. Share it with a man who needs to hear it because clarity protects you long before love ever does. And once you learn to listen properly, nothing she says will ever catch you off guard. Again,